Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to episode 141 of Veeam Industry Insights. Really pleased today to be able to be joined by a special guest. But before I launch into that, want to encourage everyone on the platform that you're viewing us on, if you're seeing this live, please chime in and share where you're viewing from. We're going to pop to a world map from time to time and wanted to see where people might be joining us from. And of course, if you have questions, comments, we've got a social team that's monitoring all the platforms that we're quadcasting on because there are 4 live. I happen to be in Colorado. We've got excellent support coming on our Veeam team in Texas as well as Georgia. But please do put in chat. We'll come back to this a few different times. But without further ado, want to introduce a guest. If you are familiar with Veeam, if you've seen a lot of videos, if you've taken some of the Veeam certification courses, you may be no stranger to one Matt Price, who's joining us from Object First. And I'm a little jealous. Matt has probably the world's most tricked out home studio. I am in a makeshift environment while home remodels continue on at a snail's pace. Matt, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking some time out to visit with us.
Dave, thanks so much for having me. Stoked to be a part of the show. And, I can sympathize with the home remodel. The contractors are never punctual, are they? It's one of those things. It's just par for the course. But thanks so much for having me on today's episode.
Just take us through a little bit of history. You've been in the IT business for some time and then the backup or availability business for even longer. And you alluded to the fact that you were at Veeam and now at Object First, but give us a little background.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started on your side of the fence at Veeam way back in February of 2012, and I worked there for a little over a decade. Started on the engineering team, worked my way up, and then shifted over to the enablement, so training, video content creation, that type of thing, right before I made the transition. So absolutely, love Veeam, love, working with you guys. I have a long history. Now that I'm over at Object First, so I run the enablement efforts here at Object First. So any type of partner enablement, end user enablement, all the way to internal enablement, as well as video content creation. So that's really what we're doing here at Object First.
Outstanding. So one of the things we try to do is not repeat ourselves too often, which gives me a license to semi-repeat myself, Matt, just a little bit. What I want to do to set up the conversation we're about to have is just talk through a little bit about, why we're here and offering a partial solution. The reason I say partial is because collectively, we're not trying to dictate what a customer does. We're trying to give them options and give them the ability to make best decisions for them. But as a precursor to that, why we're kind of concerned about addressing this is that cyber threats are extremely real. I know there's probably some fatigue about hearing about that, but it doesn't make it any less true. So my colleague, who you know well, Jason Buffington, he and I have shared some of Veeam's industry-wide research, not just Veeam customers, but industry research from across the globe. Most recently, 1,200 organizations, less than 6% Veeam customers. And it was a blind survey, Matt. We just wanted to understand what's the state of the market. The bad news is that when we think about the backup in particular to cyber or ransomware, 93% of the time, 1,200 organizations said the bad actors went after their backup repository. And, the other 7% of the time, it's possible that they just didn't detect it or didn't detect it yet due to dwell time. But, better than 4 out of 5 or approaching 4.5 out of 5 going after the backup repository means that we got to secure that. And, if we think about it, the other stat that I wanted to share, just reiterate, on average, again, not just Veeam customers or Veeam plus Object First customers, but on average, recovery took 3.5 weeks. Now, that's average. I always like to point out the boundary conditions map because some of those people are going to hit the boundary. Hey, yay on the 1 out of 5 that they were able to get up in 1 week or less. Not so yay on the 1 out of 5 that took 1, 2, 3, or even 4 months to be able to get back up and going. And we've got some other research that showed that on average, people were getting hit 2 or 3 times a year. If you start doing some simple math here, you realize that's a lot of downtime to really trying to be able to juggle the business while you're pretty quickly trying to forensically understand, are we even still under attack? What data is clean? Do we have an infrastructure that we can recover to?
Mhm.
And here's where I kind of want to now really put a finer point on things. When we asked people in this survey who weren't just backup admins, they were CISOs, they were SecOps people, they were IT operations people, not just backup nerds like you and me. But the number one thing that rose to the top that you can do in your response plan is have backup copies that you have known integrity for. So I
Yeah.
just find that fascinating because, we've been trying to preach backup for some time, but now to have others in the organization, including a chief information security officer, saying, hey, you really got to make sure your backup infrastructure, your backup data is clean. So before I transitioned into now what's some of the answers, if that's the bad news, we want to get to the good news. But let's
Mhm.
give a shout out to people and see where they're tuning in from. All right. I told Matt in the pre-call as we were kind of in the virtual green room, we get really excited when some of these larger countries come in live because it just maps out such green dominance. So looking across the map here, you can see very many places, obviously, but you see we've got Canada, of course. We've got Mexico that lights up quite a bit. If we look over, got UK. Actually, I should get down. Yeah, there we go. We've got UK, Cyprus, which might be a new one for us. Romania, Serbia, Luxembourg, Austria, Germany, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Russia, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, also coming in strong. And then Brazil, I'll just pause on that because if my colleague Jason was here, he would no doubt say, Brazil, I love barbecue. He's from Texas. Wish I could go down to Brazil and eat some steak. Nicaragua, Mexico, Colombia. And then if we look over, we've in South Africa, Tunisia, Angola, and I'm so sorry, I'm going to mispronounce this, but Cote d'Ivoire, and I apologize out there. That is a first time viewer from that area, as far as I know, in that 141 episodes. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Keep chiming in where you might be tuning in from. And of course, if you have any questions, but let's just go back now. I want to dispense with the setup and get to the antidote, right? Our goal in the next couple of dozen so minutes is to put people in a better position so that they're not on the wrong side of those statistics that I just cited.
Yep.
One of the things I like to point out before I really turn it over in earnest to Matt and we double click on what Object First brings to the table and how Veeam and Object First interacts is that Veeam itself has a number of different options that we can support. We're very much collectively, as you'll learn from Object First, about supporting various different kinds of objects. And if we look at the first slide here, Veeam offers a number of different ways that you can ensure that your backups are immutable. Immutable just meaning bad actors can't delete them or alter them, inject poisonous data into them. Just pause on that and make the case for encrypting your backups because immutability is not going to solve for data exfiltration, which is just as dangerous as someone encrypting or deleting your files. But what you see if we read right to left is Veeam has an inbuilt capability called the hardened Linux repository. You can also write directly to S3 or S3 compatible buckets, a number of different deduplication solutions that offer immutability, locking kinds of capabilities. But we like to say, man, immutability start to finish. There's nothing wrong with having more layers. In fact, there's nothing wrong with having different layers of protection. There might be a reason why you have the primary lock on your door as well as a secondary deadbolt. It's a different kind of mechanism. Same thing here, your secondary or alternate copies of your data, again, can be these similar kind of targets. S3 compatible, Amazon S3, Azure blob storage, tape. Yep, I'm a physical tape fan. I think it has a role to play here, particularly if you've already invested in that infrastructure. Take advantage of it. It literally is air gapped. Then from there, we can go off to archive copies, very similarly, S3 Glacier, Azure, Tape, and all of this, maybe you don't want to be in the business of doing it yourself. All this can be done through our Veeam Cloud Service Provider ecosystem. In fact, they have an interesting offering called Insider Protection. It's essentially like a Four Eyes kind of capability. But Matt, I just mentioned, Veeam has an inbuilt Notion hard Linux repository. I will tell you myself, I'm a mainframe guy and a Unix guy, a little bit of a Windows person, and not as much of Linux person. So there are other people that are like that too. No matter how easy that we try to make hard Linux repository from the Veeam perspective, they may just want to consume an outcome. And that's one of the things that Object First can help provide.
Yeah, Dave, when we were looking at the map, I saw South Africa on there and it reminded me that it's Shark Week this week. And when you think about, ransomware and bad actors, you've got these sharks swimming from all different angles. And one of the things that I always loved about Veeam is it was so vendor and storage agnostic. It was truly a data management company, just like you said, that gave so many different choices and options to the consumers. And, when we look at one of those options, for us, introducing Object First, for those of you guys who haven't heard of the company or know what we deliver, first and foremost, I want to set the stage for some of you who have been around Veeam for some time. Object First was actually founded by the same co-founders of Veeam, so Ratmir Timashev and Andrei Baranov. And when they set out to create this solution for Veeam customers, they saw the trend in the market going towards, increased ransomware attacks, increased vulnerabilities, and really the key mission is to enable Veeam users never to have to pay a ransom. So when you look at, what Object First delivers, our product name is called OOTB, and it literally stands for out of the box immutability. And it's really founded and underpinned with three core marketing pillars that we truly believe in here. Secure being top of mind and of utmost importance because of all the reasons you just elaborated on. And you're getting attacked from all different vectors, whether it's ransomware, which is the hot button in today's climate. But the reality is you still have insider attacks, you still have viruses and malware, you still have just failure. So there's a lot of different angles where your data might potentially be at risk. And also paramount to our success is to keep everything simple. And just like you talked about and alluded to with Linux expertise and Unix expertise, and frankly, deep storage understanding and expertise, not everybody has that luxury. So our appliance is very, very simple to use. It can literally be racked and stacked and receiving backups in as little as 15 minutes. In fact, one of my colleagues, Anthony Cusimano, and I, we recorded a 5-part series on YouTube, literally called Box to Backup in 15 minutes, where we go through the whole unboxing all the way to when Veeam actually writes backups to our unit. And lastly, Dave, this is also very critical because having spent in the past decade over at Veeam, so much of what Veeam has innovated over the past, 15 years now has relied on having a high performance backup repository. When you go all the way back to like version 6 and that era with instant recovery and instant VM recovery, data labs with sure backup and all these capabilities that need high performance storage. Yes, you have other choices like deduplication appliances. You have some legacy object storage solutions. I mean, you even have file and block systems that really can't live up to that performance demand to truly leverage all the innovation that Veeam has been developing over the past 15 years. So with our unit, it is extremely powerful. We do that with a combination of a RAID 6 array coupled with flash ingest cache. So we can really, land those backups extremely quick, up to 4 gigabytes per second if you scale it out to a 4-node cluster. But what's important is the recovery performance, because that's what's critical. Just like what the stat you just mentioned about downtime when they have such an issue of ransomware or data failure, time is money and time is also reputation. And the longer they stay down, the more that brand takes a hit. So being able to recover extremely quickly is absolutely paramount to a successful Veeam deployment. And that's what OOTB delivers. It's ransomware proof out of the box, literally turnkey immutability. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But Dave, I'd love your thoughts on this, just from your perspective.
Yeah, I think I even teased with you, on the setup, from a Linux perspective, my television's running Android on it. My cable TV box is running Linux on it. I'm abstracted from that, right? I am in the business of being entertained or wanting to entertain family members and friends, and not necessarily in that context wanting to spend time with finagling what's the right optimization, how do I tweak this, how do I tweak that, right? I want it more out of the box. So that notion, of course, paramount of offering security, making that very easy to consume, very easy to make sure you're safe. I mean, simplicity is an interesting thing. Don't confuse simplicity for lack of power. Simplicity just means your time to successful, desirable outcome is made easier. And that's the powerful piece that you alluded to. I love UPI. I love self-describing acronyms, that out-of-the-box immutability. That's brilliant. I think one of the greatest things collectively we can do as an industry to fend off cyber threats is just lower the friction between doing the best practices and your daily operations. Everyone's busy. Nobody has extra resource, whether that's money, time, bandwidth, you name it. So this notion of let's just help people get to that safe outcome, I think is absolutely brilliant.
Well, and like you said, everybody's simple until they're not, right? Until the rubber has to hit the road. And, when you look at the traditional storage systems that many Veeam admins are using even today, such as a basic NAS, well, when it ships, what do you have to do? You have to provision it, configure it, set up your RAID sets, your stripe sizes, security. All that stuff is on a human to configure, which leaves that potential single point of failure with that insider threat. So when we move on and look a little bit about where UPI is designed to fit into the Veeam ecosphere, it's really designed to be that preliminary Veeam repository target where your backups land initially. Now, keep in mind, 32110 is something that we've been familiar with, in the Veeam world for several years. 3 copies of data, 2 different media sets or types, 1 offsite, 1 air-gapped or immutable, 0 errors with the help of Sure Backup. So we are not trying to be the end-all be-all for your holistic data protection strategy, but we are intending to be that initial landing target to make sure that the backups that you have on-prem are also immutable and also protected from ransomware. And, I venture a guess, Dave, when you talked about some of the lengthy restore times, it could be that all the backups that were on-prem were infiltrated, so they had to rely on their cloud-based immutable copies. Therein lies the time delay, all the restorations, all the egress hits, financially, and, those probably elongated, all those challenges elongated the restore time. Whereas if they had an on-prem immutable copy, they could have launched instant recovery in a matter of minutes and been back up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you said ecosphere, and this slide represents that well. I like how Object First isn't trying to say we're the answer for every single aspect of your data life cycle, as it relates to your backup copies, your long-term retention copies. So I like how that here you're showing that participates in an ecosystem. If you've got cloud, if you've got object storage, heck, if you've got just a bunch of disk and you want to make a secondary copy somewhere else, maybe at a sister location, one of your other facilities that might be geographically dispersed, fits into the environment that you have. I always like to think about, Veeam, obviously software only kind of messaging. How I position that is we don't at Veeam try to force a customer to make multiple decisions at once, meaning I'm not trying to say, here's the backup software, here's the hardware you need, here's the secondary hardware you need, here's the cloud that you must go and consume. Offer choice and let customers do what makes sense. Because one another sort of research stat to hit you with, Matt, but I think you might like this one is, Jason and I, along with our colleague Julie Webb, we did the largest research survey in the history of the space, 4,200 different organizations. Again, less than 7% Veeam customers on that one. 28 countries, over 4,200 respondents. When we ask people what they're looking for and what might make them change their primary backup solution, kind of middle of the pack was some said, I want software only. Also, the very next one was, I want an appliance. So some people want it one way, some people want it another way. I like that we're both preaching a flexibility message, and a flexibility message that says we can meet you where you are.
Right. Yeah, 100% agree. And, one of the things too, to elaborate just a bit on the reason we can be that coupling with Veeam as the primary initial repository is you may have heard in version 12, Veeam released the Smart Object Storage API, SOS API for short. And essentially what that allows us to do is with that integration that we've built with the Veeam R&D team around the API, we can now rival performance of, your typical file and block storage systems and even exceed that in some cases. Whereas some of your legacy on-prem object storage solutions don't really offer the random IO performance that's required to enable things like instant recovery and sure backup. So there's a lot more to the API. You can learn a lot more about that, on veeam.com, as well as some of our own white papers. But that's truly part of the secret sauce that we've integrated on the back end with V12 to really allow that performance now of object storage to be deployed on-prem. And one of the other things, Dave, when we talk about simplicity, a lot of times when you look at object storage solutions, certainly the on-prem solutions have erasure coding. So it makes your initial deployment, your initial investment a lot more difficult because many times you have to purchase multiple appliances regardless of your capacity needs just to enable their technology. So with our box, you can deploy just a single unit. It's a 2U server unit, and we have a 64 terabyte and a 128 terabyte. And the nice thing is when you initially set up the cluster, and we've got this recorded in our box to backup series, you're creating a single namespace. So when you need to scale, second node, third node, fourth node, you're not increasing the management overhead because it's still that single namespace. So it truly does enable just seamless and, back to our messaging pillar, simple scalability when it comes time to grow beyond your initial investment.
Awesome. And I'm being told we've got another update on the map. Want to hit that before we bounce back and double click on what you just mentioned. In the United States, we had another state of Maryland come in. If we look over at Europe, we'll see Portugal, Finland, Spain, Poland, Greece also came in. And we've also got Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, India. If I didn't mention them before, I may have apologies. And speaking of apologies, our great production team said, hey, here's where the country that you couldn't pronounce is from, in the Ivory Coast. So apologies for that, but thank you so much for tuning in. Speaking of a quick thank you, we did have a question from Musa. Musa asked on LinkedIn, hey, why only Microsoft SQL Server database is used by Veeam for data backup and replication? Good question. Actually, I'll give you a longer answer, but we do actually support a secondary database of Postgres as of version 12, middle of this past February. We support SQL Server, Express SQL Server, the full instantiation or Enterprise Edition. We support Postgres both as a Veeam configuration database, but also as a protected database. And Matt, one of the things I like to double click on is that while Veeam uses a database as a catalog, we are not dependent on that, because one of the things bad actors like to do is, if they can't go after the backup repository and encrypt or delete data, is just blow away the backup catalog and try to cripple the backup or data management software. Veeam writes data in a self-describing manner such that we can compile that data and bring it back with the attributes associated with that. Just to bore people, Matt, in my own home lab, one of the things I do is I also write out a copy to a USB-C attached SSD drive that also includes our reader, a Linux or Windows version. Think of it as a PDF reader. As long as I have credentials, I can go in there and access those files. So we have now two different kinds of databases we can support. If bad actors were to go after and cripple that database, we're still back in business. So returning back now, just take us through a little bit of a recap here. I like your tagline: when you think about Veeam, think about Object First.
Yeah, no doubt. A couple final thoughts for sure that we want to double down on, and it goes to that secure pillar. So what you just talked about, when we look at immutability is obviously paramount in today's climate, but that's not enough in most cases, because if you could still get to the root, if you could still access command lines, there's all kinds of things that could be done by bad actors to either reset nodes, erase the immutable buckets and things like this with the right access. So one of the things that we have out of the box when our units ship, there is no root access. So the root user has been disabled. So there is no chance of having a bad actor or a malicious employee, let's say, try to reset a node. So when you look at zero trust, that's one of the things in the industry that is very critical, in addition to immutability, but also zero access is arguably just as important, because trusting is one thing, but completely denying access is the ultimate. In addition to having multi-factor authentication, which we do, and being able to disable outside access like IPMI ports and things like this, our box is truly hardened when it arrives at the user's data center. So couple that with just a few minutes to set up and create your buckets and start writing backups. It does truly create that hardened experience that's turnkey. You don't have to know Linux. The other big thing, Dave, is support. So what happens when you need support? So our support department, when we release updates, we not only update our code, but if there's any security patches for the Linux kernel, which is Ubuntu, we keep that up to date as well. And furthermore, and this is also really big for our partner ecosystem as well as customers, what happens when there's an issue, they think it's Object First UB, but it turns out to be Veeam, or vice versa. We actually have a transfer system with Veeam support so that the end user isn't left, or even the partner isn't left with the typical finger pointing scenario. And that's a really critical thing in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we begin to wind down, want to give a shout out next step. Where can people learn a little bit more or see a little bit more even?
Absolutely. So we have a world-class SE team, actually headed up by another former Veeamer, Ryan Post. You may remember, Dave.
Yeah.
So we do live demos on demand, just like Veeam engineers do. So if you guys would like to learn more, go deeper into the weeds about the unit, all the capabilities, as well as talk pricing, be sure to schedule a demo. Just scan the QR code, reach out to us. I will be happy to conduct a demo at your convenience. Also, if you'd like additional general information, we do have an email alias. It's just info@objectfirst.com.
Outstanding, outstanding. I want to give two other call outs here. This Friday, we're going to have a special episode from our Tech Bytes group. We're going to be having Rick Vanover from Veeam, Madalena Cristo from Veeam. We're going to have Los, one of our Veeam Vanguards, and Falco, one of our not only Vanguard, but a Veeam legend, come on for Veeam Sysadmin Day appreciation. They're going to share stories about sysadmins, how sysadmins have saved the day, valuable lessons they've learned from failures. They'll discuss the best sysadmin stories shared by our community members over at the Veeam Community Hub. And then 1 week from today, going to be joined by another ecosystem partner. We'll talk about additional ways and options that you can secure your environment. I do want to also mention before we sign off that Belgium and Ethiopia also joined in. So Matt, you definitely brought the world with you today, quite literally. We've got some first-time people tuning in, some first-time countries tuning in. So shout out for that. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Matt, for visiting with us and helping us understand more about Object First. Be sure to check out that. Be sure to stay safe and stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream.
Thanks so much, Dave.
Thank you.